to introduce Raul. Raul's been my friend for a long time, and I'm so excited for him to share what he's working on today. Raul's day job is being the founder and CEO of a company, TinyBop, which, if you have kids and are into educational games, is one of the kind of, I think, most exciting game designers and developers in the industry. I love their games. They're beautiful and exploratory and all the things you want your kids to learn about and do, and none of the bad stuff. But they describe themselves. It's a bigger deal now. They describe themselves as being a children's media company, and they're known for designing playful experiences that inspire creativity, curiosity, and a love of learning for children worldwide. Raul has always enjoyed the tension between art and technology, and loves working with creative teams to turn code into delight. And so he's been experimenting with some of these amazingly powerful AI tools that have bubbled up in a number of conversations here this week already, and here to present kind of what he's excited about and kind of the boundaries of his all-consuming side project right now. So, Raul.
Yeah, hi. So as he said, my name is Raul Gutierrez, and I'm going to talk about my journey with generative AI over the last few months. And I've gone from being a skeptic to an evangelist. So let me start at the beginning and rewind. I grew up in this small town, East Texas, called Lufkin. It's in a forest. I always describe it as an island surrounded by trees. And trees instead of water. And when you're there, you have a lot of time to think and tell stories. And I come from a family of storytellers, and I sort of think in stories. And I was a geek. I was a computer nerd, photographer. And about this time, when I was in high school, I got a phone call from a man who said that he was my grandfather. And the only grandparents I knew were my abuelito and abuelita in Mexico, Mexican dad. I didn't know my mom's parents, my Irish grandparents, and so I hung up. And he called back, and eventually my mom got on the line, and then things got very serious. And she told him not to call again. And I don't believe that he ever did. Anyway, a few months after that, this very large crate arrived, and it was deposited at the end of our driveway. And the crate came with a note, and it said that it was from my mom's father, and he had died, and he had arranged to send the contents of this crate as his final wish. And my mom never opened the crate; she burned it, and so I never found out what was inside. And I thought about the crate a lot because I know my Mexican family really well. We have a lot of pictures, we have a lot of stories, hundreds of photos. I'm a photographer, so I like all that stuff. But my mom's family was really a blank, and especially her childhood. From my mom's childhood, I have exactly 3 pictures of her. And I would try to ask her questions about sort of what the deal was, and I never really found out much about her parents, but, she said that she had this family in Maine that stretched way back, but mainly she just deflected. And so soon after that crate incident, I went to college. 6 months after I graduated from college, my mom died. And to my great regret, I never learned about the family. I never learned sort of what was in that crate. And I happened to be thinking about that crate a few months ago when I was reading up on some papers on these new generative AI techniques. And yeah, it's something I'd sort of been interested in for a long time, image recognition, processing. And I had the sort of idle thought of, well, now I've done some genealogical research. I've sort of connected some of the dots of my mom's story. What if I used AI to fill in the blanks? And, maybe I could sort of tell the story that way. And so, I don't know, I assume people in this room have sort of been aware of some of the stuff that's happening with these generative AI models, and it seems like it's all sort of blossomed at once. I think a lot of people that are talking about this space always talk about it as the sort of Cambrian explosion of AI, but it's really like been about 10, 15 years of research on computer vision, language models, text-to-image synthesis, diffusion models that have been trained now on billions of text-to-image pairs. And everything sort of converged this year, and really within the last 6 months. And especially in the last 2 months, since some of this was made open source. So I'm going to try to quickly summarize some of this AI stuff, but I'm not going to talk about the sort of math about how AI works. I'm going to talk about how babies learn. So when a baby is born, they have all the mechanics to see. They have eyeballs, and the image goes and is projected in the back of the eye in the same way it is with you and me, but they don't perceive anything because their brains don't understand what they're seeing. Babies only see light and shadow for the first few days. And then shockingly quickly, they start to see eyes, and then nipples, and then eyes. And we think that is hardwired. Like, they've put babies in MRIs, and they've shown them pictures of various things. And the thing that lights up the brain are faces, and nipples, and eyes. And for a short period, that's really all the baby is perceiving. And so if you've ever had like a newborn in a room with a lot of faces, and they kind of freak out and get overstimulated, it's because they're just seeing all these eyes, and it's like too much, and they can't handle it. And so, what's interesting is how you go from sort of seeing faces to understanding objects and sort of understanding how the world works. And so eventually, like with kids, this is kid's now 17, but he was 1.5 years, much cuter back then. He's going through a goth phase. So eventually, with kids, like these filters click in, and they start to notice objects, and they become interested in things. And this really starts accelerating with language. So even before babies can speak, the language parts of their brain start lighting up, and specifically they start lighting up around objects. Unless you know how to name something, you don't know what that thing is. And so, my kid got into a phase where he was really interested in wheels. And, we were on a trip, Portugal or someplace, and we spent the entire trip, with him just looking at wheels. And basically what he's doing is he's building his database. He's building his data set of wheels, and he's sort of understanding all the different types of wheels and what they look like from different angles, and big ones and little ones. And in his brain, all these neural pathways are forming. He's developing the idea of a wheel, the concept of a wheel. And then, eventually they're done with wheels and they move on to the next thing. Once that taxonomy is complete. And this is sort of like the first part of generative image making. You have to have a good data set. And if you have bad data, it can get screwed up. But as long as you have a good data set to begin with, you can sort of understand what the concept of a wheel is. But sometimes, when you're building an image, you're not just building it from an abstract concept of a wheel. You're building it from a specific object. And this is what memories are. So when we have a memory, when we are accessing a memory, it's not a recording in our brain. Memories are not recordings. Every time we access a memory, we're rebuilding it from component parts. And this is what AI does. So this is an image, David Hockney, and it's built from, I think, like 800 Polaroids. And it's an image of the pear blossom highway that he did for Vanity Fair. It was an illustration for an article about Nabokov. And he was talking about the sort of monotony of American roads. And this road does not look like this. He, as the artist, was sort of going through and taking his experience of the road and constructing an image. The actual little piece of highway, this is that actual little piece of highway. It doesn't actually look like that, but you can sort of see, the elements that he put together. So this is sort of in a very, very simplified way, when image synthesis is sort of building an image, this is sort of what it's doing. It's taking, a tree and a stop sign, it's kind of putting them together and creating something that didn't exist before. And stable diffusion, some of the other techniques, they use these sort of tokens of things and create the image like that. And so the question is, can you create something totally new from the data set? And that's sort of the big beef against, AI, is that everything is basically a derivative of something else. You have this data set, and when you're creating it, it's just this sort of copy. But culture is derivative. Culture is a copy. And so, I'd like everybody to consider this guy, Adriano Celentano. He was this Italian entertainer. He loved 60s rock and roll. And specifically, he loved American and British rock and roll. And he listened to a lot of Elvis, I get the impression. And he always felt, he tried to sing Italian rock and roll, but he always felt that something was missing when he sang it in Italian, because Italian just didn't sound right. And so he didn't speak English, but he had been trained on thousands of hours of English. So he decided to sing this song in pseudo-English of what he thought rock and roll should sound like. So I'm going to play it for you. All right. So, I'll stop it there, but basically, this song is not English, but it became the #1 hit in Italy, and still remains popular to this day, and it's his #1 song, and Italians accept it as English because it's good enough. It's his understanding of what rock and roll sounded like because of his training of millions of hours or whatever, made it sound like rock and roll. And so, interestingly, I actually ran the song through Whisper, which is an AI that can decode English, and generally it rejects foreign language or Babel, but it actually decoded it as English, even though none of those words are actually in there. And if you listen to that song, you will think that you will hear words in that song that don't exist, and different people will hear different words that don't exist. And so this is how sort of a model can create something out of pieces of things that it's been trained on and create something new that makes sense. And so in AI, there's 3 basic ideas. There's concepts, objects, and styles. So a concept might be a 60s rock band. An object is the Beatles. The Beatles are a real thing. And a style is, this is Beatlesque. This is Os Mutantes. It's a Brazilian band that they're sort of copying the Beatles. You can look at it with, these are impressionists. The object is Vincent van Gogh, and the style is the style of Van Gogh. And when AI is trying to sort of figure out how to create an image, it really has to sort of understand what you're talking about. When there's problems with AI, it's usually a confusion of one of these things. It's that it doesn't understand when you say, that something is a Van Gogh, if is the person Van Gogh, is it the style Van Gogh, is it self-portrait, which would be an object. And so just a few years ago, for the state of the art for computer vision research was the ImageNet database, had 15 million text-to-image matched images. And it wasn't primarily being used to generate images, it was being used to sort of understand the world. It was for robots to like understand that that's a chair. But then researchers, I think some of the earliest that I saw was the University of Michigan, 2016. They took that database and tried to create images. So this is the 2016 version of a bird with a red crest on its head in a tree, and this is the 2022 image from DALL-E. So this was, 15 million images. This is 250 million text-to-image pairs with 12 billion parameters. Stable Diffusion has 600 million captioned images in the database and 4 billion parameters. And I think the state of the art right now that I've seen, and again, it's changing like virtually every day, is Google's Parti, which is not public, but it's using an autoaggressive text-to-image. It has 20 billion parameters. And to give you a sense, this is, if you ask DALL-E to create an oil painting of two rabbits in the style of American Gothic, it confuses American Gothic, the object, the painting in the middle, with Gothic being sort of a Gothic rabbit, whereas the Google Parti version can understand. The textual understanding of what's going on is so much better that it can really create something that is pretty much exactly what the intention was when you wrote it. And so creating intentional images has been the thing that I've been trying to do over the last few months, and I'm just going to sort of run through it. So I started using the minute, Midjourney and DALL-E became public. I started right away, and I probably started like everybody else, like doing robots. And if you log into the community, you'll see a lot of robot images and a lot of like, elves and that's true of any sort of early adopter computer community. If you look at sort of, I'm old enough to remember Zork, and text-based things that were all robots but this will democratize very soon. And another, my sort of first robots that I created. But these images didn't look like my images. They didn't look like something I wanted to create. So I started working on things that I care about. So like, I'm interested in old photography, and I decided to create an image of like the Paris Salon of 1930. And pretty convincing, like if you're looking at it from afar. If you start to get into the details, it kind of falls apart. But from afar, it looks pretty good. I asked to create a salon full of Rothko's hung salon style. And again, this was a confusion. So it confused Rothko. So I didn't have a room full of Rothkos. I had sort of a Rothko room, full of paintings. And then, I had that sort of idea of the Maine relatives. And so I typed in, sort of sea captain Maine, somebody on the beach in Maine. And I got these images that were pretty good, but again, they didn't really feel like my images. And so my thought was, how can I use the tools to take a photograph of myself and create them? Because, if you're looking at old photos, like there's always a nose that looks like your nose. So these were started with images that were images of me. I erased the sort of everything but the head, and then let the AI create the rest. And those were also, fairly convincing, but they're still based on images that I had. It's not really useful if you're, trying to create a story and like have a character. What you really want is a model. So these are some more that were made with that technique of, again, these are just photographs of myself sort of erased and redrawn by the AI to create, people that might have existed in Maine. I actually also imagine what they would look like in the future. So, what would future residents of Maine look like? But about 2 months ago, Stable Diffusion was open sourced. And when it was open source, they allowed you to create your own private models. And for me, this was this is the killer app in the whole thing. Because rather than just creating an image that is either based on another image, I could actually take something that I cared about and create a model. So the first thing, the day that this happened to be released, I was for whatever reason thinking about Mexican retablos. Mexican retablos are these religious images. They follow this iconography, and my abuelita loved this weird little baby Jesus called San Niño de Atoche, and I plugged that into the AI. Well, San Niño de Atoche is very specific. It's this, again, weird, creepy little baby Jesus carrying a basket and a staff with a gourd. And the iconography is very defined, so it should be perfect for AI. But when I plugged it in, I got these even creepier images that had nothing to do with what a retablo looks like. And the reason is because it wasn't trained. So there's this site called Have I Been Trained? And you can type in any piece of text to see what the token would look like, and you see how it's trained. And you see there's all this garbage imagery in there that is maybe related to, there's a town in Spain called Atocha, or there's a few San Niños in there, but you couldn't really, with the training basically was bad, so it screwed up, the data set was bad, so it screwed up what the image was. So with that thinking, I took these images, I created a model, and training on 5 images, I was able to get to this, still wrong and a little creepy. Training on 15 images, I was able to get to this. It's still kind of an awful looking retablo, but you see all the pieces there. It's carrying the basket, it's got the staff with the gourd. And I'm sure if I trained it on more, I could basically make perfect retablos. I just need a bigger data set to get there. And so then, of course, then I was like, well, I got to throw my head in there. And very quickly, with a relatively few number of images, I was able to create shockingly good versions of my head. And I could create almost perfect photographs of myself, driving a car or in a jetpack. But then I could also say, what would I look like 10 years old? Now, I didn't look like that 10 years old, but that probably looks more like me now than what I look like at 10, or what would I look like Korean? My wife's Korean. What would I look like as a sailor with a big beard, or as a 65-year-old or an 80-year-old? And the 80-year-old looks a lot like my dad. A lot. What would I look like if I just got out of prison? And so the model is, having private models to me is the killer app of AI, because it really allows, if you have your own data and you have your own data sets, then you're sort of off to the races. You can just start to imagine, this is the same model, but just you have almost infinite variations. This, again, main sea captain idea, as a Roman coin, as a statue, as a aging Mexican wrestler with a pompadour, I think was this one. And the Mexican wrestler thing really hit me, because when I was a kid in Mexico, I really loved Mexican wrestling, and there was a guy called El Santo who would fight vampires. And so I kind of went down the rabbit hole and really started doing a lot of Mexican wrestling images. And these are images that are not derivative. I know a lot about what Mexican wrestling in the 60s and 70s looked like. It did not look anything like this. But it feels like, there's a reality to it, and it will only get better. It will only get better. And that's really interesting to me as somebody who likes to create images and tell stories. Now, the downside of this is that, so after having, I spent the last 2 months sort of creating these images every day, is that you really start to doubt reality. So the other day I saw this Twitter post about the Pickelhaube Pyramid, which I'd never heard of and I didn't believe was true. These are German helmets after World War I on Park Avenue in front of Grand Central Station. And I thought, this is not true. This is not real. But it is real. And so it was something that was built in New York City. And so the thing that it made me realize is that you really have to have like these verifiable sources of truth. Because the more that these images are out there, and one of the reasons I was doubting that image was because I was creating myself as a parade float, as a Thanksgiving Day parade float. And a lot of these sort of parade float images happen to have kind of a similar sort of layout. And so this idea that, that we have a way to verify that an image is going to become increasingly important, because very soon we're not going to be able to tell the difference. And we're going to be able to create these sort of alternate histories with these synthesized images. And it's already a problem, with misinformation and photoshopped images, but this makes it an order of magnitude easier and order of magnitude more convincing. I actually have a folder on my computer that I titled Not Raul, because I realized, if I get hit by a car and my kids are looking at these images, they're going to be like, what the hell? So I do think that this idea of truth becomes a really interesting one, and it's a hard problem. Also, the more these images get out there, the more they'll pollute the data set. The more you'll have copy of copies. And so data sets will become very valuable. The people that own data sets that are connected to text descriptions that accurately describe what's in them suddenly become very valuable. And so, it might kill Getty Images because you can just generate an image, but Getty Images still has value because they have all this, these data sets that are locked this way. For me personally, I love it because this is a way to tell stories. So, I can sit and generate like creepy monsters, as many as I want, then pick one and then put it into a context. And this is sort of what I want to do, for my company, but the tools aren't quite there yet. Like right now, I can wake up from a dream, I can take that dream, describe it, and record it with words, and create an image that, I sort of get through, and eventually I'll find something that like matches it, and it's powerful. But I don't know if it's powerful to anyone else. It's powerful to me. I think listening to other people's dreams is often like, it's kind of boring. But as somebody who creates things, we make children's apps, and in our practice, we work with, really amazing artists, and I want to give them tools to move faster and to tell stories and to make things sort of more efficiently. And the first time I showed a lot of these tools and these images to the people on my team, especially the artists, were very upset. They were like, I'm out of a job. And my argument to them is, you're not out of a job. I'm not buying you for your ability to, I'm not paying you for your ability to draw. I'm paying you for your ability to imagine. And these are sort of imagination enhancers. And so, if we have an artist that sort of, I think this image took weeks to make. It's part of an app about biomes, and every tree is a specific tree, and these, wolves were a specific wolf. And in this app, if you move the sun, you go from day to night, and you can keep moving the sun. You go from summer to fall to winter. And it took a very, very long time to make. But I can train that artist with an AI, and now I can imagine new biomes. And maybe some things are a little off and the birds have 4 wings, but I can fix all that. I can fix all that, relatively easily. And I can, once I'm able to do this live, I can create like vast worlds for children to play in. And that's really very powerful and exciting. And right now, the tools that exist, so we have this layer of the models that are built on these big databases that only big companies that millions and millions of dollars have been spent can create. There's this new layer of applications on top of that are basically a thin veneer for the command line. And they're basically sort of exposing what is possible right now. But there's this next layer of applications that needs to be built. And they are applications for people like myself and people that work in my company that, if we want to create a consistent set of characters and in a set, in a consistent style, those are the tools that haven't been built yet. And I've suddenly got very interested in building them, and probably I'm gonna start a whole new company to do that. We're very close. And a lot of these tools are sort of like obvious, and the obvious ones will be built quickly. But then there's some that are not so obvious that kind of take deep domain knowledge of what it takes to create professional media. And those are the things that are really interesting. And then also, sort of personally, I didn't think that I could be moved by AI, but when I was doing all this, eventually I put in a bunch of images of my mom. I created a model of my mom from, she died when she was 45, and these were pictures from her 30s and 40s. And I'm now older than my mom. And I asked the AI to sort of, what would this model look like at 77, which would be her age now. And there was a real reality to that image that came up, one that took my breath away. And it had the ring of truth. And it was very Black Mirror, a little weird. And I'm not sure exactly what to do with it, but I think experimenting with those kind of experiences will potentially be very powerful. And Tyler was talking the other day about sort of creating things that sort of outlast you and that could last in perpetuity. These little models, in theory, you could train it on your face, you can train it on your voice, you can create a pretty good version of yourself. And that's something that is, again, I don't know where it's going to go, but it's a very interesting thing to contemplate, think about. It's all still very new, and I'm still playing with it and figuring it out. So anyway, if you want to follow along on my AI experiments, I have a new Instagram called Is This Electric? And basically most of the slides you've seen here I've been posting in real time. And I'll continue to do so as I try to figure this stuff out and eventually productize it. So, thank you very much.
Thanks, Raul. Really appreciate it. How are we doing on time? Maybe are there a couple questions for Raul, if you don't mind, before we break up, or we could talk over lunch or something too. But yeah, let's go ahead. I'll pass it through.
I don't know if anyone's hungry, but very, very interesting. And also thank you for bringing us through your discovery, because I don't know about anyone else who's messed around with this stuff, but it's interesting to see how other people are using it. When it comes to children, which I know is a world you know well, I'm very curious how, when I was a kid, there's a thing about copying to learn how to draw that's really interesting with creative kids. Like, I used to copy the covers of Nancy Drew books as like a hobby. And but then I learned what my own creative voice was through discovery. If a kid is introduced to these tools really early, how can we still take those kids that have a knack for creativity into their own voice to create new pathways rather than getting them too excited about just what they can generate based off of these databases?
Yeah, this is exactly one of the problems I'm sort of obsessed with and thinking about. And the answer is I don't know yet, but I do know that what I react against is I've seen people taking a child's photograph and running it through AI and then showing what sort of the real version of that would look like. And as a parent, and just as somebody who sort of like studies how kids learn, I think it's horrible because you're basically, it's an endpoint on their creativity. And I think the best tools are ones that are open-ended, that allow kids to better tell their own stories. And so I can imagine, I'm thinking very hard about this when we're trying to sort of figure out if there is a product there, is there a tool that takes a children's drawing and brings it to life without supplanting what they've created? And I think there will be a lot of people that will create things that will supplant it. You draw like a little, 2D car and it'll become a car. I don't want to do that. I want to take that 2D car and allow a kid to, to drive it around, the world and to do different things with it. So to me, that's the key, is where is the story? I think we were talking yesterday, it's sort of the modern Legos are sort of these predefined endpoints. And, old-fashioned Legos were just squares that could be anything. The best toys for kids are a set of blocks. And if you give a kid a set of blocks, they might say, what am I going to do with this? But you just have to give them a little bit of context. You say, build a zoo or build a house. And then, for the next 2 hours, they're in what for parents is the sort of the platonic ideal of play. And so the question is, how do you give the kids, those building blocks rather than endpoints?
Raul, super cool. I use some of these tools in what I do in school. I think one of the promising areas for this is co-production and co-creation. Can you talk a little bit about that, using these tools and any experience you have? And I think with kids especially as well, a kid draws a line and then a model draws the next line in the drawing. The kid draws the third line, right? So this idea of like co-creation to create, like 1 + 1 = 3, right? Versus 1 + 0 = 0.7. So kind of this idea of co-creation being more than the sum of its parts.
I've only, so far this has mainly been a solitary experience, but I've been working with one of the people in my company, and we've been essentially passing images back and forth, and, I'll start with a seed, and then he'll fill it out, and then, we'll go from there. And it's interesting. I think co-creation is often, if you work in a creative company and you're creating things from scratch, everything is co-creation. Like, basically in my company, I mainly I try not to be a micromanager. I try to be sort of a producer and somebody who is like guiding ideas. But in this case, I think the danger is sometimes you can kind of overwhelm their ideas. So like last night, we have this new app. It's this AR app, and there's these AR snakes, and they can sort of eat things in the real world, and we wanted to create an evil flower. And so our designer did a whole page of sketches of flowers, and then I actually fired up one of these AIs and sort of like got some really evil looking flowers. And I sent it to her, and she was really upset because she felt like I'd usurped her process. So I do think that's kind of the danger of these tools, is sometimes things feel so finished that it feels like you're taking away somebody's creativity. So finding the right balance of that, I think, is really important.
Thanks. That was awesome. And I specifically wanted to ask a question about, you alluded to Black Mirror, so I assume you're a fan of the show. Mm-hmm. The episode you're talking about is where they train someone's life based on the text messages. And when they die, the person thinks that they're talking to the version of themselves, or the version of that person. So I just wanted to have some fun speculation and ask you, like, how does this end? Or where we're going.
Yeah, again, I don't really know. Like, I don't know if it's comforting or disquieting to think that there's this sort of weird AI version of me. Like, I was showing my 15-year-old like how to use the AI. He took the model of my head and put me in all sorts of ridiculous situations. I I don't know, but I know that there is a place, like that image of my mom, which I didn't show on purpose because it like felt personal to me, you know? And you can't unsee it. You know, there's something that once you've seen it, that image is really powerful. Images are like our, you know, interface to the world. So, the answer is I don't know. But I know that there will be interesting things that happen, and there will also be awful things that happen. Like, you know, a lot of the AIs that exist right now have filters that allow you to, they sort of stop any sort of inappropriate material. But there are plenty of places on the web that basically just turn that off. And don't go to these sites because you really can't unsee the things that people are posting there. And you know, my first click in, you know, it was all like Trump porn, and I you know, was just shocked. I was like, man, these people really, I hate Trump, but these people really hate Trump. And then I realized that they didn't actually. They were Trump fans that were imagining things I don't even want to talk about. So.
Kind of a twofold. This was incredible. Kind of speaking back to the example you just shared about a worker who had hand-drawn some things. One part of the question is, how do you kind of see traditional arts marrying with more tech-enabled arts, you could say here? And also, how could you imagine possible compensation models in the future, giving credit maybe where due, or, yeah.
Yeah, this is a real issue. You know, I created images from artwork that we as a company own, that, you know, is work for hire, so we own it completely. But when we bought that artwork, this didn't exist. And so the artist didn't imagine that I was going to take her artwork and essentially regenerate things that she had never drawn in her style. And I don't think I would put that into production without consulting her and sort of figuring out something that was fair. And the way I see it is I really hope that soon artists will be empowered enough with the right tools to be able to use these to create more, just like Photoshop is a tool that sort of gives artists superpowers too. That said, it's a real problem. Like, you know, you can go and you can sort of, nobody's gonna be upset if you create, you know, sort of something in the style of Van Gogh, but, you know, if you create something in the style of Esther Pearl Watson, who's like this little artist in Texas who does like Grandma Moses style paintings of UFOs, you can, like, I typed it in, I was just curious, you can create a pretty good facsimile of her art, and that seems wrong to me. And the training models right now are looking at a lot of data that's just scraped from the web, no consent. You know, it was a sort of like, let's do it and worry about those problems later. But it's very quickly going to be a problem. And I don't think anybody's figured it out. Some people that cite Have I Been Trained is a tool that was made for artists to see if their artwork has been trained, and it allows them, in theory, to opt out. But I also don't know where that ends. Like, I know what I, as somebody who have built my career working with artists, and I really value the artist and the sort of human touch, I just want to empower them. I don't want to sort of take away from them. You know, that said, there are certain things that, you know, if I can build a 3D model, it would take me 3 months of somebody's time and work, and I can do that like almost automatically, very quickly. It's going to change things. You know, there was a time when every sign in New York was hand painted, and Photoshop came out, and everything was created by Photoshop, and the world became a little poorer for it. But you know, it was sort of the price of that change, and I think some of that is bound to happen.
Hi. I really love the example of the music. I grew up in Europe. English is my third language. I learned I knew that song really well. And then I learned English, and I went back to it, and it was like, what is this? It sounds like English. And I think it actually gives you a gift of being able to hear English the way non-English speakers understand English, right? And I'm recognizing that some of this uncanny valley stuff about the images are kind of almost there, but not quite. That's a gift as well, right? And that gift is going to go away when the images are good enough that are completely indistinguishable from the real thing. And I'm wondering, like, the final piece that I noticed was you mentioned you can't unsee something. And the models have this gift of being able to unsee something. You can untrain them, right? You can take it out of the data set. I'm wondering, is there something in there where, like, what can we do now to make sure that we kind of retain some of the ability to unsee things, to be able to see things with new eyes? I think it's impossible, but I hope I'm wrong.
Well, I mean, we have to hope that the people at Google and, OpenAI and so on, and I know some of those people, like, they're ethical people, but they also really want to push the boundaries. And so I think that right now, if we actually knew what was happening with the compilation of those databases, some of it is probably wildly unethical. I know that they're not scraping social media. I'm pretty sure of that. But they are scraping just public websites. Again, those big models are not something that a person or even a small company can create right now. It's not just having the images, it's also matching them to the text. The metadata is as important as the image itself. And then creating the hierarchies within the image to sort of understand what the image says. So unfortunately, we're kind of at the mercy of these big companies and their sort of, hopefully they will work. I can imagine that if things got out of control, which you can imagine in a tight election in 2024, it could happen, that there could be regulation. But even that, I think the genie's kind of out of the bottle. Stable diffusion is I have it on my machine, and I actually have it on my phone. I have a version of it working on my phone. So.
On that note, great times. Well, Raul, thanks again for your uplifting talk.